Evidence of Design here on 100.9 FM WXIR. Thank you all for being here, listeners, for the 37th episode of Evidence of Design. I am your host, Jason Taylor, and we are joined also by my good friend and co-host, Matt Treadwell.
Good morning.
Happy New Year, everyone. This is our first episode coming back into the year of 2019. I do hope that your holiday season was as productive and fulfilling and restful as possible. I at least think it's important to try to enter the new year with some form of rest
Optimism.
and grounding. Yeah, some form of optimism. That's right.
That'll last.
But let's try to keep that going as long as possible. And I do hope, listeners, that you were able to find some peace over the holidays. We will be talking about a few things on today's show of Evidence of Design, and your support and voice is always encouraged. As a reminder, you can call into this show at 585-219-8889. Again, that's 585-219-8889. If you want to talk about anything or the three things that Matt and I will be covering today, we're going to start the show by talking about the government shutdown. Matt, Happy New Year. Happy government shutdown. This is a tradition now in the Trump presidency.
You got just what I wanted.
You know, last year we did the same thing where we entered into the year of 2018 with a government shutdown, and we're back.
I had forgotten about that.
Well, you're not going to forget about it anymore because it's now a new American, precedent we have. It's a new thing. So I look forward to the shutdown of 2020 if we get there, and we'll be talking about the government shutdown.
Remember when I said that optimism wasn't going to last?
No.
If we get there.
If we get there, yeah. Just kind of messing. But we will be talking about the government shutdown. What's going on with that? What does a government shutdown mean? Why are we having a government shutdown? What are the effects of it? We'll be spending a few minutes to talk about that. After that, we'll be talking a little bit about education. Some of our first episodes on this show were talking about the educational system. And we really think it's important to talk about education because I believe, at least, that education is one of the most important human rights, human possibilities, and societal goods that we can all really focus on. And so we'll be talking about education and the idea of whether or not education needs to be fixed. Is the educational system broken? We'll be talking a little bit about that to kind of tackle it from an angle. Our past episodes on education include talking about how to teach controversial issues and really whether or not there are best practices in education. And you can always find our past episodes on YouTube by searching for Evidence of Design. And in the second half of the show, I'm really pleased to play an interview for you that I had with representatives from the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative. That's RMAPI for short. And RMAPI, among other things, is piloting what's called participatory budgeting, and that's a democratic process through which you, as a community member, can vote on how public money is spent. So RMAPI is piloting the first widespread participatory budgeting project in Rochester, and voting on the participatory budgeting projects, all of which will help to fight poverty in Rochester, begin on Monday, January 7th. So I'm very excited to bring that to you, listeners, and that is something that if you're a Monroe County resident and above 11 years or older, you have an opportunity to directly vote on which projects get funded to help fight poverty around Rochester, and that will be in the second half of our show. So recap, we'll start with the government shutdown. We'll go into a little bit about the educational system, and then second half of the show is the interview with RMAPI on participatory budgeting. Sounds like a plan.
Sounds good.
All right. So, folks, one last time, call in 585-219-8889 if you ever want to participate. You can also tweet us at evidencedesign0, or you can email us, evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com. We are live for you here on Saturday, January 5th at 11 o'clock and here for you. Matt, are we ready to take it away?
Let's go.
Let's do it.
The whole place is dark. Every light on this side of the town. Suddenly it all went down. Now we'll all be brothers of the fossil fire of the sun. Now we will all be sisters of
Jason Molina and Magnolia Electric Company with the song Farewell Transmission.
So, Matt, we are just about into 2019 and on the 15th day of a government shutdown. This is the third government shutdown in the second year, in just 2 years of the Trump presidency. So Trump's been president for 2 years. This is the third government shutdown. I don't know if that's a record, but I think that might be. Mm-hmm. We are 15 days into our current government shutdown, and that makes this one of the longest government shutdowns ever. Tomorrow, Sunday, this will tie with the 2013 shutdown, if we remember that, during the Obama administration, when Senator Ted Cruz, of course, among other Republicans, shut down the government for 16 days in opposition to the Affordable Care Act because, Republicans don't support health care for people. But that was one of the most notorious shutdowns, and lasted for 16 days. And the cost of that shutdown were estimated to be more than $2 billion for just shutting down the government for 16 days. So we are 1 day short of that. We're 15 days into the third government shutdown under the Trump presidency, costing billions of dollars and lots of anxiety and uncertainty for millions of Americans, not only for those who are either working without pay or don't have work right now, but for all those folks who are unable to visit national parks, get trash picked up, worried about their social safety nets, such as food stamps and things of that nature.
Federal housing loans.
Yep, housing. The effects are wide-reaching. How did we get here? On Wednesday, December 19th, so we're going back to right before the holiday started at the end of 2018 here, a few weeks ago. On Wednesday, December 19th, the U.S. Senate unanimously passed a funding bill to fund the government, and that funding bill did not include funding for a border wall. Okay, well, the day after that, December 20th, the House passes a funding bill that did include funding for a border wall. Now, Donald Trump, of course, if we remember back to his campaign, he had campaigned on building a wall between the U.S. and Mexico. He believes that there are lots of either terrorists or illegal immigrants and crime and drugs coming across the border between the U.S. and Mexico, and he campaigned on building a wall there, right? Build the wall. That's one of the most notorious things about the Trump presidency.
There are illegal immigrants coming over the border, but most of them are not terrorists.
Absolutely.
In fact, probably 99%.
Yeah. And how you get most people being illicitly in the country is they're in the country legally through their visas, and then their visas expire and they haven't left the country yet. So that's how you get most of the people in the U.S. illegally. But of course, all of this is spurious. Like, this whole wall thing is completely spurious, but I'm not even going to go there. Let's just keep it on a how should we frame this?
Emotionally detached.
An emotionally detached, phenomenological approach to this whole wall and shutdown thing. So Wednesday, December 19th, the Senate passes a funding bill, no wall spending. Thursday, December 20th, the day after, the House passes a funding bill, wall spending. This was led by the House Freedom Caucus, particularly Mark Meadows, a congressperson from North Carolina, and Jim Jordan, a congressperson from Ohio, really lobbying for this wall spending.
That's one of the most right-wing groups in the House of Reps.
Correct, yeah, very libertarian, Tea Party, Freedom Caucus, all that sort of stuff. And so Trump originally, before all this started, Trump originally was like, yeah, you know what? I will sign a bill that funds the government without wall funding. And that's what the Senate did, right? So Trump says, sure, give me a bill that funds the government without wall spending. That's fine.
Flip-flopper.
So he says that. So McConnell's like, great, let's pass a funding bill. So they pass a funding bill. And then the House, of course, with their more right-wing elements, and also because Trump flips. So Trump flips and says, no. I refuse to sign anything that does not include border wall funding. And also the very far right-wing media, Rush Limbaugh, et cetera, were criticizing Trump for being weak on allowing the government to be funded without a border wall funding.
Yeah.
So Trump flips his position.
That's what he cares about.
Right. He just cares about his base sticking to him. The 33% of Americans or whatever who will stick by Trump, whether he, as he said, shoots someone at Fifth Avenue, So, and this is the predicament that we're in, where the Senate originally passed something. It was unanimous, bipartisan support. The House passes something with wall funding. The Senate won't pass that because you need 60 votes in the Senate to pass it. And guess what? Democrats are not and should not vote for $1 for wall funding. And then the government shuts down on Friday.
Republicans shouldn't vote for it either, but
Right. Yes. Right. So since then, this is the 15th day of the government shutdown. Trump has said he refuses to open the government until $5 billion for a border wall is secured. $5 billion.
Part of the reason he's making such a fuss about this is because Republicans have lost their majority in the House of Reps. So this Trump might see this as his last chance to get one of his main, if not his only, consistent policy points from his campaign to pass.
So I've given a lot of thought about this.
Yeah.
I often think with the Trump presidency, if this is some really intelligent game of chess, that I'm just like, is Trump a master and he's just thinking so many moves ahead where you can't see it coming? Or does he doesn't know how to play chess, and therefore viewing his moves as logical or pragmatic is not the right way to view his moves, because he's not playing by the game. And even if he does, even if Trump is playing chess, and even if you beat him, he'll be like, no, you didn't beat me. I was the one who won. And he'll just lie, because that's all Donald Trump does is lie, right?
I think he's playing a form of chess where knights are bishops and rooks are pawns. And
it doesn't matter. And he'll change it back, he'll do whatever serves his interests. So, I don't view this as a good thing for Trump. I don't see how this benefits Trump politically. I think most Americans looking at a government shutdown say, the shutdown is bad. The government shouldn't be shut down. That's proof of bad government. It's wasting money, and people are having stress over this. And I don't know how you can look at this any other way than calling it a Trump shutdown.
Yeah.
This is not a Democrat shutdown at all. And I think that Democrats should stick by their guns on this. Don't give up anything to Trump. Let Trump keep digging in on this ridiculous policy provision to build a physical wall between two allied and neighboring countries. It makes no sense.
I agree with you in that I don't think that the wall should be built. I don't think it's a solution to any sort of problem. And I don't think that Democrats should cave and compromise on it in any way. But I don't necessarily know if I believe that everybody or that most people even in America are looking at this and seeing it as like just Trump throwing another tantrum. I feel like a lot of people perhaps are seeing this and thinking that both sides are to blame, and that they think that there are people right now who are either working without pay or are not working at all because of the shutdown. And I think that the most pressing matter on their minds is that they need their money. And I think that I don't have any proof of this or any other reason to think this other than my gut, but my gut tells me that a lot of people are viewing this and seeing this as just the ineffectiveness of democratic government, and that they think that people on both sides are not doing their jobs.
Yeah, I would agree with you that this is a loss for democracy, right? Take partisan politics out of it. I think this is just a loss for democracy, and it proves how troublesome our system has gotten. I would hope, obviously Democrats are culpable because of course they could come to the table and figure out some way to get the government open, but they've tried. Nancy Pelosi was signed in as Speaker of the House on Thursday of this week, and right after she was signed in, guess what? The House of Representatives passed a funding bill to open the government. Mitch McConnell has said that he will not have the Senate vote on anything that Trump won't sign, which makes no sense because Congress is a co-equal branch of government. It is written into the Constitution on purpose for checks and balances that if the president decides to veto something, Congress can still pass something with a 2/3 vote. So I don't see this as a Democratic issue at all.
Right.
Because, again, the shutdown happened, the Senate passed something, and then the House, which was Republican-controlled, was the one who passed the bill with wall funding. Well, now that the House is Democrat-controlled, they just passed a bill that was set to reopen the government, and it's similar to the bill that the Senate just passed before. But now McConnell is saying, no, we're not going to vote on the thing that we essentially just passed before this happened because it makes no sense.
He's a Republican working with a Republican president. He wants to have that level of unity, I assume. Yeah, of course. Well, that's the point. And so that's what I'm getting at, where it's like, I don't see how this isn't a loss for Trump. And, right.
And they realize that.
Yeah.
And this is how we get into the mess that we're in, because people are playing partisan politics, right? Where you should just open the government. Because guess what? One of the departments that's closed during the shutdown,
Homeland Security.
the Department of Homeland Security is closed. And that's the department that, oversees border security.
Without a doubt, the greatest irony to the situation.
Yeah. And it's also just so sad that, Trump wants $5 billion to build a wall when that $5 billion could go to like healthcare or infrastructure.
Or stabilizing Mexico.
Right. Or foreign aid that would prevent people from wanting to leave their countries in the first place. And so this is where I really draw a line and say, if I was an elected official, no, you do not bargain with this at all. This is unacceptable.
Yeah.
And I am sad that Donald Trump is holding American taxpayers hostage, because remember that he campaigned on the fact that Mexico would pay for the wall. Mexico's not going to pay for a wall between our two countries. So
And he knows that because he's asking for money from Congress now.
Right. And so Donald Trump has essentially given up on that position, right? He knows that Mexico isn't paying for the wall. So guess now who's paying for the wall? American taxpayers.
Yeah.
So he's holding us hostage now. He's holding American workers hostage, most of whom, by the way, he's saying are Democrats, according to his tweets. He just sent one out 10 minutes ago, or an hour ago, that said most of the people without work now are Democrats. So he's holding all those people hostage just to buy him a big vanity wall on the U.S.-Mexico border.
Yep.
Yeah. So happy 2019 as we enter into Trump politics. I'm really interested to see where this goes now that there is split government in the House. Now that in Congress, now that the House is controlled by Democrats and the Senate is controlled by Republicans. There's a lot of power Democrats have now, and I at least think that's a good thing. And I think Trump is trying to figure out how to govern now with that split government, and he is going for, I think, the most firebrand way he can start with, and I think that's his style, is just cause confusion and chaos and just go for it. And he's definitely doing it, and we'll figure out how the Democrats navigate their way through this, especially as very soon Democrats start to campaign for president. In fact, Elizabeth Warren just this week announced her candidacy for
Did she announce her candidacy? I thought she announced like an investigation committee to look into it or something.
Well, she's running for president.
Okay.
Yeah, she's.
Heard it here.
I mean, Elizabeth Warren's running for president for 2020, and so already the we're not that far away from 2016. It feels like, and we're already going to start to talk very soon about who's running for president for 2020. So let's see what happens. But this government shutdown, I think, is just further evidence of the fact that Donald Trump has zero idea how to govern and is just hurting democracy and the American people.
On to our next subject.
And moving on, though, folks, you are always welcome to participate in this discussion, of course, on 100.9 FM WXIR. That's what makes this community radio station. Community is the fact. One of the reasons, and of course, is that you can participate. And you can do so. Please do give us a call. Do you disagree with what I'm saying? Do you agree? Do you have questions? 585-219-8889. 585-219-8889. Or you can email us at evidenceofdesign101@gmail.com. Be happy to hear from you. Very quickly, this is going to be tough to frame, but I was reading an article, Matt, right after New Year's, and it really, really bothered me. It was an article that was published in NPR, and it was called Why Millions of Kids Can't Read and What Better Teaching Can Do About It.
I have also read this article.
Excellent. We have read the same article and are therefore prepared to talk about the merits or not so merits of the contents of this piece.
Not so merits.
Whatever the word is. And so, again, Why Millions of Kids Can't Read and What Better Teaching Can Do About It. That was published on NPR on January 3rd, but it was republished from a American Public Media article in September of 2018. And so the article talked about, basically it set up the scene where American schools are struggling and a lot of kids in America don't know how to read. And the authors write that a lot of kids in America don't know how to read because these national standardized assessments, namely the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that's the big federal educational sort of national test that's given out to figure out, as a whole country, how are we performing and what do the kids know and what do they know how to do.
Yeah.
So using that as evidence, the authors write that fewer than 40% of students in America rank as either proficient or advanced on their reading levels fewer than 40%. Now, the National Assessment for Educational Progress measures students based upon 3 scales. It's either basic, proficient, or advanced. And so according to these authors, that test shows that fewer than 40% of at least young students under the age of under the 8th grade are proficient or advanced.
3/5
Right. Thank you for converting that.
of the nation's youth are not reading at a proficient or advanced level,
Yes.
according to that assessment.
Right. And so we won't go with what that means, of course. We have to know, we should be critical and wonder what does it mean to be proficient, basic, advanced, etc. On this test. But long story short, here's a quote from the article. The author writes that one excuse that educators have long offered to explain poor reading performance is poverty. In Bethlehem, a small city in eastern Pennsylvania that was once a booming steel town, there are plenty of poor families. But there are fancy homes in Bethlehem too. And when Sylvia examined the reading scores, he saw that many students at the wealthier schools weren't reading very well either. So that was the paragraph that really jumped out to me, Matt, in this article about education, because the author essentially writing that, like, you know, in this one paragraph writes, like, look, a long time educators complain that poverty is an issue. Poverty is not that big of an issue because, look, there's poor kids and there's wealthy kids who aren't reading all that well. And so there's got to be something else here going on that's not just poverty or wealth. And the authors back this up. They write that essentially how reading is usually taught is that teachers will try to teach kids how to decode using try to use context clues really to figure out what they're reading. So if you come across a word that you don't know how to pronounce or you don't know the meaning, well, use context clues to figure out what is going on.
One teacher described a method she used in teaching her kids. They would spend like a week on a letter. They would like take A, for example. They would eat things that began with A. They would use words that started with the letter A, you know, write sentences with the letter A. And that was it. That was like learning letters and learning to read, basically.
Right. So there's different approaches to take, and I think that was for like a kindergarten classroom, perhaps. Right. And so there's this one approach that says have kids use context clues and inferencing skills to figure out how to read. And then the author really puts forward like learning about reading as a science. And they argue that if you learn basically phonetics, if you learn how different sounds are put together to make up a word, then that's really how you most effectively teach kids how to read, is phonetic knowledge.
Yeah, they argue that that teachers have long been operating under the idea that kids naturally develop reading skills, like it's just something that is hardwired into our brains, like language. And the author makes the argument that no, that's not the case. Children need to be taught, and to understand how best to teach them, we first need to understand how people come to know how to read.
Yeah.
It's an ontological argument, Jason.
That is. It is a, epistemological argument, too. Epistemology is how we come to know and understand things.
That's true.
But, so when I read this article, the author puts forward, do we teach kids how to inference and how to use context clues to read, or do we just teach kids phonetics or the science of reading if there's a science behind it? I wasn't so much bothered by that as I was by that paragraph about poverty. And I was really bothered that there was no evidence to back that up. It just said that this individual in education saw that students in wealthier schools weren't reading very well either. That's a quote, and that's it. Nothing to back it up. So I did a little bit more research, and I went onto the Pennsylvania government's website, the school, the clearinghouse that Pennsylvania has about all their schools, and I looked up 2 of the schools in that district. And now I should note that a local newspaper in that Bethlehem area school district that was referenced in the NPR article had an article that came out a few months before that said there was a huge jump in reading scores because of full-day kindergarten for the students in the Bethlehem area school district. So that article referenced nothing about a new science of reading. It just mentioned that there was full-day kindergarten now. So I just wanted to point that out to say that whenever we're talking about successes in education, you can have just completely different causes for success, right? One article is like the science of reading, others like full-day kindergarten. Long story short, if you look up 2 of the schools that are mentioned in that article, they write that this one particular school, the Fountain Hill School, had at the start only around 16% of its students reading at grade level, but after changing to full-day kindergarten, they had 42% of their kindergartners reading on grade level. So a little bit double. However, a wealthier school has, they started out around 79% of students reading at grade level, and now there's 100% of their students reading at grade level in kindergarten because of full day kindergarten. Long story short, if you break apart those schools and look at them, that poorer school, 90% of their students are economically disadvantaged, and 65% of them are Hispanic. That wealthier school, only 14% of the students are economically disadvantaged, and 70% of them are white. So, I don't know. I'm not saying like, oh, you know, this whole NPR article is completely debunked. I am just saying that I get frustrated whenever I read articles about education that try to offer technical solutions to complex social problems. And so I'm always really skeptical when people talk about failures in education and say teachers don't know how to teach, or administrators don't know how to administrate, or even parents don't know how to parent. You know, I'm really frustrated by all those accounts, because it's as if there's some magical program that can fix education.
Right. And reading this, I'm not sure that necessarily the author would make the case that, oh, poverty is not a factor on a student's academic performance. I think what they're trying to say is that in the research that this individual Silva did, there were both kids from rich homes and from poorer homes who were struggling, and maybe that was evidence that there was something additional going on. I don't know. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but if they are making the case that, you know, poverty is a non-factor, that's simply not true. That's not something that I agree with or believe in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I agree too. I mean, I think the problem I have is not the argument that you could have technical solutions that increase academic outcomes, right? I think that if you train teachers to be better teachers with empirically based teaching practices, kids will perform better. You know, I'll give you that. And I think you've seen that in this Bethlehem area school district in Pennsylvania, where students have been performing better with reading. But the problem is the gap is still there between the wealthier and the poor. And the problem is the wealthier districts are already tapped out, right? According to this Hanover Elementary School, 100% of their kids now read at grade level. They're done. But the problem is the poorer schools only has 42% of its students reading at grade level, even after the interventions of the full-day kindergarten, the better teaching practices, etc. So to say that poverty isn't an issue in education is mind-boggling to me, because it's not like this poorer school district then could do some other technical solution to make things better, right? I don't know, maybe have better administrators now or something or whatever. Like, I think it's summed up by a quote in the Atlantic. They wrote an article, this was back in 2016, called America's Not So Broken Educational System. And the quote from this Atlantic article is this: "The public education system is undeniably flawed. Yet many of the deepest flaws have been deliberately cultivated. Funding inequity and racial segregation, for instance, aren't byproducts of a system that broke. They are direct consequences of an intentional concentration of privilege. Placing the blame solely on teacher training or the curriculum or the design of the school, alleging brokenness, perpetuates the fiction that all schools can be made great without addressing issues of race, class, and power." And I think therein lies the truth, perhaps, or more of a truth, towards helping all of our schools succeed. And I have brought in nothing at all about the Rochester City School District, of course, in this conversation, but I'm hoping, listeners, if you're listening and you're familiar with the school district, you'll reflect on the fact that we have an inordinate and unique amount of poverty concentrated within the city, particularly within the areas that the city school district supervises and provides education to. And, there's, of course, this is a very hot button issue in our community, but I don't think that schools will ever truly improve until you fix poverty.
It's a multifaceted issue. Are there things that we could be doing better in terms of just like best practices? Probably. But is poverty a factor? Absolutely too.
Mm-hmm. You're playing more of the middle card there.
I am like, what's the word? I am middle of the road.
Middle of the road, Matt.
Yeah.
That's good though. No, you're being, I think, yeah, definitely. I just think that more attention could and should be given to poverty or economic and social injustices is what I'm saying. In our previous episodes, we've talked a lot about the increasing rise in so-called best practices in education, and those best practices rarely, if ever, take into account poverty. They're always technical solutions.
Often ignore that.
Yeah. And that's this is a much bigger and longer discussion, but it ties into neoliberalism, which we talked about before, which is
the point of the show.
The point of the show, right? It is the point of the show, the critique of the show. But neoliberals and neoliberal ideology oftentimes produces what's called just technocratic solutions to issues, where they purposely ignore social issues in favor of, fixing problems scientifically. Let's say climate change. Why bother fix the way we consume and produce things? Let's just make better technology, which we've talked about before, in fact, in our last episode too. But this is not to say that we're just going through a history of all the things we've talked about. Listeners, I do hope that you are doing well and enjoying, and if just tuning in to Evidence of Design on 100.9 FM WXIR. We jumped around a lot so far. We started by talking about the old government shutdown that has become a tradition in the Trump presidency. Yes. And also a little bit about education here, reading through an NPR article that was published on January 3rd called Why Millions of Kids Can't Read and What Better Teaching Can Do About It. And thinking about whether or not the things in that article are true or not, or how they could be strengthened or not, based upon whether technical solutions to education are better as opposed to social justice issues to education. But now we'll turn our attention again to a different topic. So I had the great pleasure of sitting down with two folks from the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative. That might be a familiar term to some folks around Rochester. That's it's a collective impact group that works to build kind of coalitions to help fight poverty and reduce systematic barriers to residents of Monroe County, particularly the city of Rochester. And so they're known shorthand as RMAPI. And I sat down with these folks to talk about participatory budgeting. I won't say much more because it'll be covered in the interview, but I will say, as full disclosure, I have volunteered with RMAPI on this participatory budgeting process. So I've volunteered with them, and now I'm sharing a little bit more about that process through an interview, and this directly impacts you. So you'll get to hear that if you are a resident of Monroe County and if you are age 11 or older, you are able to vote starting Monday on which projects and proposals as a result of this participatory budgeting project should be funded up to $50,000 to help fight poverty in Rochester. So you are able to vote. Let us hear a little bit of the interview, though, on 100.9 FM WXIR. I'm joined now by Graham Hughes and Lorianne Grambe from the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, also known as RMAPI. Graham joined us back in August to talk to us about participatory budgeting, a democratic process through which community members decide how to spend public money. RMAPI is piloting Rochester's first widespread participatory budgeting initiative. They've secured $200,000 for residents of Monroe County to decide how to spend, so long as the money goes towards a project that fights poverty. After collecting ideas and drafting proposals throughout 2018, the process for voting on which proposals get funded is starting right now at the start of 2019. Graham and Lorianne, thank you for joining me today to talk about participatory budgeting.
Thanks for having us on, Jason.
We're happy to be here.
So can you start and just remind me and also to listeners, what is RMAPI?
So the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative is what's known as a collective impact initiative. So RMAPI has a small backbone staff based out of the United Way. We run a bunch of working groups of different organizations, agencies, businesses, all that kind of good stuff that work together to fight poverty, as well as piloting a number of different projects, such as participatory budgeting.
Yeah, one of the cool and key things that we do over at RMAPI is really focusing in on community engagement. We want whatever solutions, ideas, projects that come out of RMAPI to be community-owned, community-supported, and community-backed. So through our community engagement efforts, we just want to make sure that we are making sure that the voices of those that are in need are at every single table at every single point. And so participatory budgeting really gives us an opportunity to do that in a really genuine and authentic way.
Are there any other guiding principles to RMAPI besides community engagement?
Yeah. So RMAPI has three guiding principles: structural racism, community building, and trauma. And those principles underlie all the work that we do, and everything related to poverty in our community.
And are those principles involved in the participatory budgeting project?
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about community building, PB really embodies that at its core. It's all about getting your everyday community members to come together and really realize the power of their voice, the power of their vote as well too. PB has been completely run and directed and dictated by the community members. They've decided everything from how old a person has to be to vote, which is 11 years old, to, how the ideas are going to be voted on, be it ranked choice or whatever the case may be. They had final say in everything. And I think that really is key in that community building aspect.
There were also a number of ways that the guiding principles were built into the process. For example, in assessing each of the ideas, the volunteers that participated in that piece of the participatory budgeting process actually went through and assessed each idea according or against each of RMAPI's guiding principles. Just one example of how that happened.
And just remind listeners one more time of what those guiding principles are.
Sure. They're structural racism, trauma, and community building.
And how were those principles created, or how come those were the principles that were identified?
So way back in 2014, when RMAPI first started, 2015, I'm sorry, there were a ton of different original groups, working groups that were convened. And this was, experts in the field from nonprofits and government and business and all that kind of stuff, but also people impacted directly by poverty, people experiencing it now and historically. And it was from those original conversations about what poverty is and what needs to be done to do anything about it that those guiding principles emerged. Yeah.
And really the way that they emerged as well is that they were a common theme in all the different work groups and all the different conversations that were coming up. And, the conclusion was made that there wasn't a program that could be created to really address these three things. And so having the guiding principles be the lens in which all the work that we're doing is looked through, can allow the work to be sustainable, right? Because if you don't deal with the foundational issues that are really feeding into the huge poverty that we're seeing right now, you're going to be having the same conversations year in and year out. So making sure that everything is addressing structural racism, making sure that everything is trauma-informed, and making sure that everything really is about community building can really help create a strong and firm foundation for anything that we're doing.
And those, all of those goals are to fight poverty.
Yes. Right? Yes.
And so I know we've talked a little bit already about what participatory budgeting is, but can you kind of give your own definition? And if a listener could walk away, how could they tell other people what participatory budgeting is?
So I like the definition that you gave right at the beginning a lot, that participatory budgeting is a democratic way for people to decide how to spend public money. It's really pretty as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so I know that with budgeting, it can be a really complicated process. And so how does this money, this $200,000, how does that become money that the public can decide how to spend? Like, what was the process for getting that money, and how does that become money that the public can have a direct democratic say in spending?
So the money for participatory budgeting comes from our contract with New York State. In negotiating that contract originally several years ago, one of the ideas that came up was this participatory budgeting process, because it's a process that's used all over the world, really. It started in Brazil in the late 1980s and has since spread to over 1,000 different cities and communities across the world. And it came up because of its real potential to build community and empower the voices of people to decide how money is spent in their community and in their lives. So that's how it came up in those conversations, and through our contract with New York State, we're able to do this.
And why is participatory budgeting chosen as a project or initiative to focus on through RMAPI? What are kind of the goals of PB to accomplish?
So as awesome as it is to talk about $200,000, I think one of the true essence of PB is really understanding that process. And I also think of it as like a way for community members to flex their voting muscle. I don't know another cleaner way to say that, but really, kind of understanding the importance of voting and being able to say, hey, I've seen this project go from an idea to an actual project, and I voted on it, and it happened to win, and now you're able to see the project actually happening and helping people the way that they said they were going to do. And I think that really helps empower people as well as encourage people to vote more. We're really trying to make sure that our community is civically engaged and that they understand what that means and why that's valuable. At the end of the day, it really comes down to the fact that your voice matters and empowering people to really understand that.
And it's also about spending money more effectively to solve problems. The whole idea of community engagement is based in this belief that the people who are closest to a problem are also the closest to the solutions to that problem. And participatory budgeting is a way of really taking that idea and turning it into a practice. And that's very important to us and to the Anti-Poverty Initiative.
So listeners, if you're just tuning in, we're talking with Graham Hughes and Lorianne Grambe from the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative. We're talking about the participatory budgeting process that RMAPI is piloting in Rochester right now. They've secured $200,000 for residents of Monroe County to vote on deciding how that money is spent towards projects or initiatives that fight poverty around Monroe County. Lorianne, you mentioned earlier that residents age 11 or older can vote. So if you are listening right now, and if you are age 11 or older and a resident of Monroe County, this directly impacts you. Can you both describe the process used to collect ideas and create proposals for the projects used throughout this participatory budgeting process?
Sure. I'll talk about the idea collection process. So really, it was just a matter of getting out to the community and talking to people. We found that the most effective ways were to meet people where they were at. So if that meant setting up a table at DHS downtown in St. Paul and sitting there and engaging with people directly and just asking them, hey, what are some things that you wish could be in your neighborhoods, in your communities that can help make things better? What does that look like? And just kind of getting people to really think about this would be an ideal situation, or maybe you guys could build on such and such program, and really having those concrete conversations. So from May to September, we were all over the city, really just different locations, public market. We linked up with the food link curbside markets. I mentioned we went to DHS, rec centers, just different locations, just meeting with people and having them give us their ideas. And I think we collected just about 300 ideas total through that process.
So after we collected all those ideas, we started a process of proposal development where volunteers known as budget delegates, and I think we had about 20 volunteers, gathered together in groups or committees, divided up the ideas based on theme or topic. So some of the themes of ideas were housing, transportation, education, children and families, health and safety, all that kind of stuff. And then they took the ideas that fit with those themes and went through a process of ranking the ideas based on a number of criteria, from the feasibility of the project to its impact on each of the guiding principles, to its impact on equity. So is this project going to affect the people that need the money the most? And after that process, they narrowed down their ideas into several workable projects. The number of projects that each committee ended up producing varied a bit based on the committee. We ended up with 22 total projects in the end. But after they went through that process of ranking them, they went and researched the project, like how would this actually happen, gathered information about different agencies or organizations that could implement it, different people that would implement it if not a specific agency or organization, and created full project proposals complete with the description of the project, budgets for how much, for what the project would actually spend, and then they brought those finalized projects forward to us. They were validated by our community leadership team, which is a group of community members that's been overseeing this process from the beginning, making a lot of those really important decisions about how things are going to work. And then we created a ballot from all those projects, and on Monday, people will be able to vote on which ones to fund.
Oh, as early as Monday, and we'll get to that in just one second. But if I can reiterate a little bit, Graham, I'm hearing that there were hundreds of proposals, hundreds of ideas that were generated by community members, and then eventually that trickled down because of themes, grouping by themes, that trickled down to 22 actual projects being created by community members. And those are the projects that community members can vote on as early as this coming Monday, January, oh Lord, what is the date today?
January 7th.
Yeah, I should have just asked you, because of course you would know. January 7th, as early as Monday, January 7th, folks around Monroe County can vote on those proposals. All community generated.
That's right. Voting will go from January 7th through January 28th. People will be able to vote in person at sites all across the city throughout that 3-week period. We have a big kickoff event on Monday evening, that Lorianne will talk about.
Yeah, so we have our big PB voting kickoff taking place Monday, January 7th from 5 to 7 p.m. At School 53, the Monastery Academy, and that's 625 Scio Street. So this is going to be a chance for community members to kind of come out, learn about these projects. You'll be able to ask questions, get some feedback. We'll have some food, some snacks for you all. There'll be some giveaways as well too. I like those. I know other people like those as well too. And then you'll also be able to get a chance to get a free haircut if you want it. We're going to have a barber there to hook you up if you need. But most importantly, we just want to get people out to really learn about these projects and also be able to cast your vote as well too. One of the cool things that we're going to be able to have to make sure that we are being accountable as much as possible is we're also going to be having the ballots and everything in Spanish as well too, so that if that is an issue for you, that'll be taken care of. But we're just really excited to get everybody out. We want families to come out with their kids so you can really start showing your kids the importance of voting, how it's done, and the impact that it's going to have as well too. And I'm really excited to see how this goes.
And so voting will run from Monday, January 7th through Monday, January 28th. That's a 3-week period.
That's correct.
And the kickoff event, again, is when and where?
It's Monday, January 7th, which is in just a few days, from 5 to 7 p.m. at School Number 53, the Montessori Academy, located at 625 Scio Street in Rochester.
And so if folks can't make that kickoff event, can they vote at other locations throughout that 3-week period?
Yeah, we have locations set up all over the city, both during the day and in the evening, for people to vote in person. We also have an online option for voting available. It's this really, really cool platform designed specifically for participatory budgeting by Stanford that we've been fortunate enough to get our hands on. Both information about the in-person voting sites as well as links to the online site are available on our Facebook page. That's the Participatory Budgeting Rochester Facebook page. If you just go right onto Facebook and Google Participatory Budgeting Rochester, it should come up. Yeah.
So as far as the sites are concerned, every single day throughout those 3 weeks, there's going to be some place for people to vote. Specifically, in the evenings, we have a voting site at almost every rec center, with the exception of 2, I believe, because they close at 5:30. So any given day, there's a rec center that people can be able to go to and be able to vote as well too. So we are giving everybody an opportunity to make sure their voices are heard. Having multiple offerings throughout the day, throughout different times of the day as well too, weekends as well. So, and if you have any ideas of other places we can make sure we're at to get people to vote, definitely let us know about any voting sites as well too.
And what are the eligibility requirements to vote? Do you need a form of ID or?
So you don't need any ID. The only thing that we ask of voters is that they sign an oath for us that says they are a permanent resident of Monroe County and 11 years old or older. The reason that we didn't want to require any ID was because that creates barriers for people. And we really didn't want to do that. So, yeah.
And after all of the voting, how will the projects that won have been decided? Like, what's the criteria to determine which projects win?
So we're using a ranked choice voting system. So people will get 5 choices, their top choice down through their fifth choice of projects. After the ranked choice voting system, comes out with the top projects, we'll just go down the list of the projects that win and, divvy money up to all of those projects until the 200,000 is gone. So, we could end up with 4 projects that are each costing $50,000, or we could end up with, more than that cost less than $50,000. There's a few projects that only propose for $10,000. So, we hypothetically end up with 6, 7, 8 projects.
Are you able to give an example for listeners what some of the projects are without trying to pick favorites or anything? Is there like an example?
Just randomly pick.
Sure. I can talk about a couple. So one project that's really cool, I think, is a project called the Hangout Spot. It's a project run out of the Marvelous Minds Academy, which is a local business owned by a woman named Rosemarie. She's a wonderful lady. The Hangout Spot is an overnight childcare program for people that work, the late night or the early evening shifts. That she will run out of the Marvelous Minds Academy. So yeah.
I think one of the random cool projects that I can think of. There's just so many. I'm literally blanking.
There's so many options. That's a great problem to have.
Well, I could talk about a couple more. So another project would be money for RTS passes. So there's just, I think a lot of different organizations offer RTS passes already, and so one choice people have is to just spend some of the money purchasing more passes for RTS, either daily or monthly passes for people to use.
So I thought of a project. So there is one project that is really about providing people with emergency funding for security deposits. I come from a social service background, so I understand just how tough it can be for some people to have everything ready to go but not be able to get that last bit of money to get themselves into stable housing, and to be able to have a project that allows for that to not necessarily be a barrier anymore, I think is really, it's super exciting. So yeah, I'm excited about that. But not that, I'm choosing favorites or anything.
Yeah, none of these are our favorites.
Right.
We're just randomly suggesting projects that we have going. I'll mention one more, I suppose. So there's a project that would work with, I think the organization is REACH, which is an acronym. I can't remember the full name. But working with an organization called REACH to build the first tiny home in Rochester. They would build a prototype tiny home on a lot that I think they already owned the lot somewhere in the city, and use it as a prototype to kind of demonstrate how effective tiny homes could be at transitional housing, at temporary housing, at permanent housing for people that want their own home, their own space to live, but maybe can't afford one of the larger homes in Rochester or don't want to rent. So yeah, that's another one.
As someone who's 6'4", I really want a tiny tree house, like a vertical one though. You know what I mean? That is a cool project. They all sound like cool projects.
Yeah,
though, really.
And there's 22 of them in total.
Yeah, wow.
And the folder, there's a Google folder online that you can go on, look at all of the projects in detail. It's available on our Facebook page. Once again, that's Participatory Budgeting Rochester. Just go right on Facebook and Google that, and there should be a link right on there that you can click and read through all the projects in as much detail as you want.
And so can you remind listeners one last time, when is the voting for participatory budgeting going to happen? What are the eligibility requirements, and where can folks vote?
Yeah, so voting will officially start on Monday, January 7th. We have our voting kickoff event that's taking place from 5 to 7 p.m. at school number 53, and that is at 625 Sile Street. So you'll be able to come in, learn about projects, and vote in person. But throughout the 3-week period from the 7th through the 28th, there's going to be various sites at various times that people can vote, and we'll also have the online platform for people to vote as well too. And the Facebook page will have the most up-to-date information as far as all that is concerned. You just have to be 11 years and older and be a permanent resident of Monroe County. And we are looking forward to hearing your opinions. Yeah.
So listeners, you heard it here from Graham and Lorianne.
And that, listeners, was an interview I conducted with Graham Hughes and Lorianne Grambe from the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative on their participatory budgeting process that they're piloting in Rochester. One last time, if you're age 11 or older and a resident of Monroe County, you can vote on various projects that will help to fight poverty. And you've heard that here on 100.9 FM WXIR in Rochester. Sometimes I have to ground myself and be like, where am I, Matt? Because I lose it.
Are you? Do you?
So yeah, we had Graham back on the show before, and I'm just excited to learn about participatory budgeting as a process. And I agree. I think Lorianne mentioned that one of the best parts about it is just learning the process of allowing community members to have a greater say in budgeting.
I really liked what Graham said, where he said the people who live closest to the problem often are closest to the solution as well. I think that was something he said.
Yes. And we are getting a call right now, and I apologize if you're calling, but we do have to head off air. Normally, you can call it any time besides the last 1 minute of the show. But yes, please do, listeners. With any show, any live show here on WXIR, we definitely want to hear from you at 585-219-8889. And Matt and we thank you for tuning in and listening to us on this platform here. WXIR is such a great asset for the community, and I say that every show, and I mean it every show, because it's really valuable to have these conversations. We will be back here live next week for you. I hope we'll come back and talk about the end of the government shutdown.
That would be nice.
That would be nice, but we'll see what happens. On this past show, we talked about the government shutdown, the Trump shutdown. We also talked about a little bit of some disparities in education and different ways to approach so-called fixing education, whether they should be technical solutions or more social justice solutions. And we also heard an interview with Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative Participatory Budgeting. I want to thank everyone for being here and joining us on 100.9 FM WXIR. I was your host, Jason Taylor, and also joined by my good friend and co-host, Matt Treadwell.
I don't know half of you half as well as I should like.
If anyone can call in and let us know where that's from next time. But I don't think we can give out awards. I don't think we can say that on air. I think that's one of the things that Ajit Pai will come and get us for. But
yeah, like he's listening.
The FCC. But that would be great. Anyways, listeners, we should stop rambling. Be well. Be safe. Thanks for tuning in. And bye-bye.